Thank you for coming out. It is indeed a bit of a bittersweet day for Harrisburg. I've just come from the groundbreaking for the new federal courthouse building, a wonderful project and a huge investment in the future of our city. And yet we're here acknowledging that we do have the potential for a fiscal crisis which can still be solved, but is going to require legislative action. So let me back up and explain how we got to where we are. Back in 2013, when the Strong Plan was consummated, when the city was asked to privatize its assets and was asked to make great sacrifices, pay the highest trash rates in the region, pay the highest water rates in the region, pay the highest parking rates in the region. When all of that was done, there was a promise in Act 47 that we would have time, as much time as we would need, to be able to slowly rebuild the city's tax base. In addition to that, the Strong Plan solved the larger debt issue for the city, but it did not solve the structural imbalance that the city was facing on a yearly basis. In fact, by privatizing our assets, such as water and sewer, we essentially made it impossible to continue to plug that by borrowing money internally and shifting money illegally to cover and to hide that structural imbalance in our budget. So that was the groundwork for Act 47. Into that structural deficit came the increased earned income tax and eventually came the increased local services tax. And that is what has allowed us over the past 5 years to have balanced budgets, to begin to build up a nest egg in terms of a fund balance. But the legislature, after the city had privatized its assets, after the Strong Plan had been consummated, and after we went into recovery mode, decided then to renege on its promise to Harrisburg that there would be time, and put in a poison pill which basically said that the city would only have 5 years to escape from Act 47, and after those 5 years, its taxing authority would evaporate, or there'd be a 3-year extension, or the city, through legislative change, might be able to emerge. And over the past several years, we've been working closely with the legislature to try and show them the fiscal reality of our city, to try and have them recognize how dependent we are on those elevated taxing rates, and to try and convince them to hold up their end of the bargain. That if we acted responsibly, we were fiscally conservative, we took the brunt of all this, and by we I mean the residents of the city of Harrisburg, the legislature would at least look at us fairly, would at least look at the city's budget and recognize the realities of why we needed that earned income tax and that local services tax. Well, that came to a head on Friday, despite the inroads that we'd made with, I would say, the majority of people in both houses of the legislature. You had the Speaker of the House basically saying, not only do you have to cut $12 million, but if we couldn't do it, he'd tell us how. And that was what Act 47 was all about. It wasn't about giving a city like Harrisburg the tools to succeed. It was about a short-term stopgap measure and having those tools pulled out from under you just as you have begun to make progress. I want to first thank the coalition of people that are working together to try and help Harrisburg. We've got wonderful representatives such as Greg Rothman on one side of the aisle, Patty Kim on the other side of the aisle in the House. We have great leadership from our own senator, Senator John DeSanto in the Senate. They are going to continue to push into the fall to help educate the legislature as to why they're going to need to pass a bill which will allow Harrisburg to maintain its taxing authority. I believe that while time is running out and that we have entered a crisis, it does not have to be cataclysmic. It does not have to be fatal if we all work together to focus on the legislature, get them the information that they need so that they can make the right choices. But make no mistake, a city like Harrisburg can't just cut $12 million from its budget. It doesn't work. Our budget is $60 million. Let me give you a little sense of our budget so you understand. 56% of our budget goes to wages. 15% goes to health care. Another 15% goes to debt service. That's 86% of the budget going to wages, health care, and debt service. Tack on another 6% for pension, and that's 92% of the budget. That leaves only 8% of the budget going to supplies and services. And while we can probably restrain our spending there, a large portion of that goes to things such as utilities and other mandatory expenses. They're asking us to cut almost 20% of our budget. And the only place that can come from is from personnel. And the majority of our personnel in the city of Harrisburg, over half that budget, is police and fire and essential public safety personnel. A group which I've been trying hard to build up rather than tear down. That is what is at stake here. That is why everyone needs to work together to help pull Harrisburg out of the current crisis, convince the legislature to act in September. There is still time. A new recovery plan does not have to be adopted until the end of September. The legislature will be back in early September. There is time to work together on this. In the meantime, I do have to announce a few measures this morning and keep the public informed. Since we can no longer assume that we will be able to keep our $12 million extra taxing authority at least beyond the next 3 years, we're going to institute right away a freeze on hiring in the city of Harrisburg. That means the positions haven't been filled, we're not going to fill them. If positions open up, we're not going to fill them. We're also going to put a freeze on non-essential spending, including potentially several capital projects which have not yet been funded. That means extra scrutiny of that 8% services and supply line item. I have to sign off on every purchase order in the city. I'll have to make a judgment whether that's money that can be saved or money that has to be spent. Most importantly, we are going to work and sit down to develop a new 3-year budget projection which shows exactly what it will mean to cut $12 million from the budget. That drawdown has to happen as early as next year and slowly be phased in. It cannot all just wait magically until a 3-year extension expires. We'll be working closely with the coordinator, Marita Kelly, and her team. I meet with them tomorrow. There will be a public debate and discussion about the 3-year extension plan proposed coming up here in the month of July, and people will need to be paying close attention as we debate that plan in July and eventually move to a vote in September. These are perilous times for the city of Harrisburg. If we work together, we can craft a solution that protects public safety, protects taxpayers. I'm going to work every day to see that we do that, but we have to acknowledge the realities of the situation and how, without legislative action, the city of Harrisburg would suffer dire consequences. So with that, I will take some questions from the media.
How many jobs are affected by the hiring freeze, and what types of jobs are those?
We have a handful of jobs that are currently open. The greater effect would be for retirements. If we're not filling jobs that are retiring, and we have retirements already scheduled between now and the end of the year, that over the course of 3 years could compound into a significant savings for the city. Not nearly anything close to closing a $12 million budget gap, but at least potentially $1 million or more that could be saved. I see that as a much better course than widespread layoffs. It would include all city services, hiring freezes across all departments. And it's not something that I think we want to do, and it's something that I hope we'll be able to unfreeze if the legislature acts in September. Other questions?
Can you talk about the work you did to get that legislative action passed? I know you guys hired lobbyists, you spent money on this. Can you talk about that?
Well, first of all, I believe that there is a majority in both the House and the Senate to want to help the city of Harrisburg. There's a majority that recognizes the situation. Look, our finances are an open book. They can meet and they can examine our budget. They can see that we're not hiding in it. They can understand that you can't cut 20% when you're talking about salaries and wages primarily. They can see that the city's workforce has already been cut in half and decimated already by Act 47. They can see that there's nothing left to cut, and they want to help. So there is a widespread coalition that wants to help. We weren't able to get it done as part of the fiscal code, but we may be able to get it done as a bill. A bill has the advantage of being publicly aired and something which can be debated in both houses. We'll actively work to get the legislators the information that they need to make that bill successful. Right now we're being blocked by a very small minority of voices. I would say a minority voice that just doesn't understand Harrisburg, maybe doesn't care about Harrisburg, but it's a small minority. And ultimately, if we can get to an up or down vote, I believe we will be successful in the legislature. Yes?
Mayor, this is one of several bills that kind of got caught up in this proxy fight between Speaker Turzai and Senator Coleman, the majority leader in the Senate. I'm wondering how frustrating it is for you to be sort of squeezed by these external forces that you have no control over. It's obviously the sort of back and forth between them.
It's incredibly frustrating because Speaker Turzai does not understand the situation in Harrisburg, did not want to understand the situation in Harrisburg, basically exerted raw political power and stopped something for which there was majority support even within his own Republican Party. But that's the way the legislature works on the fiscal code. Hopefully, we can get a bill with enough widespread support that they can pass it in September. Time is running out, but time is not over yet. We still have the possibility of getting this done in the fall. That could be done in advance of my 2019 budget. If it's not done in advance of the 2019 budget, we're going to have to start drawing down that $12 million anticipated loss. Yes, sir.
What are some of the capital projects that are
I'm going to have a close conversation and examination of that with all the departments. I'm going to be going into emergency session cabinet meetings right after this, and I want to talk it out, and I'll get back to you with further details. I'm just alerting people that we will not be spending funds unless we feel that it is absolutely necessary for the public interest.
Excuse me, Mayor. How about your comprehensive plan? Is it going to be ready anytime soon? Maybe that would help in gauging our potential to make money and revenue.
Right now, the comprehensive plan is with the Planning Commission. They meet, I think, once a month to revise that draft and revise that document. Ultimately, the comprehensive plan is not something written by the administration. It's written by the Planning Commission. When they're ready to submit it to City Council, it'll be submitted to City Council. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any possibility that the court intervene on the city's behalf because they were the ones that transferred the tax authority and it's right now? So the one city continue their way. So where is the responsibility of the court?
Ultimately, the responsibility lies with the legislature. The state is a creation of the city is a creation of the state. The legislature makes the rules which guide our taxing authority. The courts have to enforce those realities. And I can say that we've had great support from the court system. We've had a Commonwealth Court judge that not only recognized the importance of the local services tax, but authorized the local services tax. They've been willing to look at the financial reality of the city and understand why it's important that those move forward. But ultimately, it's not their call. They can only enforce the law. Yes? If we were able to maintain our taxing authority, we would have a sustainable future for the city of Harrisburg. We would not need to raise taxes further. We would be able to live within our means, and we would be able to continue to grow. The irony here is that we are continuing to grow. We're continuing to see our tax base expand. We're continuing to see revenues expand. More people are moving into the city. More projects are being done in the city. But you can't expect to fill a $12 million gap with 5 years worth of growth. It's a project that's going to take a generation. It's going to take 20 years to get to the point where perhaps we could live without that elevated authority. So part of the proposal in the fiscal code was we put in the fiscal code a provision that said that to the extent that the city began to grow and additional revenues were coming in, we would use those revenues to help establish a OPEB trust, which is a trust for post-employment benefits for former city employees. It's a great expense. It's something which elevates that health care percentage that I've talked about earlier today. And it's something that all cities throughout the Commonwealth are trying to struggle with. How do you fund? How do you fund the long-term obligations of the public? Well, that would be an opportunity to begin to fill that trust over time, and if that trust were to be filled, then the taxing authority could expire. I can see that happening again over 15 to 20 years. It can't happen within 5 or 8 years, and there's the rub. And again, when the city adopted the strong plan, made the sacrifices, part of the deal was that the legislature would be there, would be partners in the city's recovery, and that's why it's so important that they step up now. Any final questions?
Clarify, the city will continue to levy for an LSP and EIP taxes for the next 3 years at the current rate, and then it would reduce that authority.
Right now, it would continue to levy them till the end of this year. If the city adopts a 3-year extension plan, as is possible in September, then it would be allowed for 3 more years, but 3 more years only. There's no provision for an extension beyond that. That's a total of 8 years to bring a city back from the brink of bankruptcy. It's simply not enough time. Yes?
Mayor Patrick, are you, the city hired a lobbying firm to help on this issue. Are you satisfied with the representation that you got from the lobbyists? And you feel like that was a worthwhile investment?
I am, and they're still working hard with us every day. I've been in consultation with them already earlier today, and we've got a full-fledged strategy for how we can build support in the fall. They've done a good job. I want to state that we have the majority of people in the state legislature in favor of helping Harrisburg, in favor of living up to their responsibilities and willing to look closely at the numbers and recognize that this is something that has to be done. Unfortunately, a very vocal minority has been able to block it, and hopefully if we continue to draw attention to this crisis, this looming financial disaster, if we can draw attention to that, hopefully they will act in September, and that is certainly what we need.
One of his record was sitting president of that public hearing that after the 4-year time march. So at least it looks publicly, people in the church moving. So when does it become clear the severity of the situation?
The hearing that was in March was not the new recovery plan. That's coming up in July. That's when you're going to start to have a conversation about the future. The hearing that was in March was just a statement of the realities of Harrisburg's financial situation. That's what it was. And that statement said that without legislative action, the city could go back to the state of fiscal emergency. That's what the coordinator presented. I think we were all hopeful that the legislature would want that not to happen and that we'd be able to work to avoid that. I think that the assumption that that is going to happen can no longer be the case after Friday, and is why we are here today and why we are forced to enact some of these austerity measures that I've already announced. All right, final question. Yes?
Sir, please repeat this question. You said that the city state, correct, state.
The state, yes, correct. The coordinator there will be hearings on a new recovery plan that will be for 3 years. Ultimately, council has to vote on that plan towards the end of September. It will also coincide with the legislature coming back in September. Until then, the only thing certain is that we have our taxing authority through the end of this calendar year. And that's why, with the future uncertain, we have to level, we have to be honest with the public, and we have to explain the situation that we're in so that we can all work together to try and get us out of it. All right, I said last question, but you can have one more.
What is more of the issue to you that the rationale for all the things that the city has done, or the unreasonable time frame?
I think it's a combination of both. I think, first of all, that there are many reasonable people in the legislature that recognize that this is important, that Greg Rothman being one of them, that recognize the degree to which Harrisburg is successful really impacts the entire region. We don't want to go back to where we were, where the negative headlines were dragging down the entire region. But we've got to act now because time is running out. All right, thank you all.